What if the platform that promises fame is actually a gateway to a dark, manipulative cult? What if the millions of followers, the likes, the shares, and the applause were all just part of a carefully crafted illusion, a mask hiding something far more sinister? Welcome to the world of 7M Films, a management company that promised its young influencers the world fame, fortune, and a platform to showcase their talents. But behind the glittering facade lies a disturbing reality. Allegations of emotional manipulation, coercion, financial exploitation, and even sexual abuse, all orchestrated under the guise of a legitimate talent agency. At the center of this storm is Robert Shin, the enigmatic figure who leads not only 7M Films, but also the Shekinah Church, a religious organization that, according to former members, is nothing less than a cult. This isn't just a story about a management company, it's a story about power, control, and the vulnerable individuals who fell prey to it. In this investigation, we'll dive deep into the disturbing details of how 7M Films allegedly manipulated its influencers, isolating them from their families, controlling their finances, and subjecting them to emotional and, in some cases, physical abuse. We'll explore the testimonies of those who escaped, the families who are still fighting to reconnect with their loved ones, and the chilling tactics used by Robert Shin to maintain control. This is not just an expose, it's a warning. A look into how easily the quest for online fame can be twisted into something dark and dangerous. Stay with us as we unravel the truth behind 7M Films and the Shekinah Church and uncover the full extent of the damage they've caused. 7M Films was founded by Robert Shin, a man with a background in both religious leadership and media production. Initially, the company was presented as a management agency for social media influencers, particularly those on platforms like TikTok. Shin, who had already established the Shekinah Church, used his influence within the church community to attract young, aspiring influencers to 7M Films. The company promised to help these individuals achieve fame and success through strategic content creation and brand partnerships. The Shekinah Church, founded by Shin years earlier, was originally a small, charismatic Christian community. Over time, however, its teachings began to evolve in more controlling and extreme directions. The church emphasized strict adherence to Shin's interpretations of Scripture, and members were encouraged to cut ties with non believers, including family members. This isolationist approach created a closed environment where Shin's influence over his followers grew increasingly strong. As 7M Films and the Shekinah Church became more intertwined, it became clear that the management company was more than just a business. It was an extension of Shin's religious control. Members of the church who were also part of 7M Films reported that they were expected to live according to the church's strict rules, which included everything from how they dressed to how they interacted with others online. Early on, there were signs that something was amiss. Some members noticed that the boundaries between church and business were blurry, with Shin exercising control over both their spiritual lives and their professional careers. Former members have since reported that they were pressured to comply with Shin's demands, even when those demands seemed unreasonable or invasive. However, many of these red flags were dismissed or ignored at the time, as members believed they were part of something special and divine. The connection between 7M Films and the Shekinah Church set the stage for what would become a deeply troubling environment where the lines between faith, personal freedom, and professional ambition were dangerously blurred. Once you were inside 7M Films, the true nature of the operation began to reveal itself. This wasn't just about managing TikTok careers, this was about control. Absolute, unyielding control, and it all started with cutting off connections to the outside world. One of the most chilling tactics used by Robert Shin and the Shekinah Church was their methodical restriction of contact between members and their families. Former members like Melanie Lee have recounted how they were pressured to cut ties with their loved ones, who were often labeled as negative influences or even threats to their spiritual well being. This isolation was gradual but deliberate, starting with subtle suggestions to focus more on their spiritual family and eventually leading to a complete severance of outside relationships. Take the case of Miranda Derrick, a popular influencer who suddenly became distant from her family after joining 7M Films. Her family was deeply concerned when they realized she hadn't spoken to them in months, and when they did finally reconnect, they found a different person, someone who was emotionally distant and seemingly under the control of the group. Miranda's story is just one of many that illustrates the lengths to which 7M went to isolate its members from any external influence that could break their hold. But isolation was just the beginning. Once members were sufficiently cut off from their support networks, the financial control began. Shin and the leaders of the Shekinah Church allegedly manipulated members into handing over control of their finances, often under the guise of spiritual guidance or divine instruction. Members were encouraged, or rather coerced, into sharing their bank account information, making donations that were more like mandatory tributes, and even working for the church or 7M Films with little to no compensation. This financial exploitation was designed to keep members dependent on the group, unable to leave even if they wanted to. Then there was the constant surveillance. Members of the Shekinah Church reported that they were monitored both online and offline, with church leaders keeping a close watch on their social media activity, private communications, and even their physical movements. Former members like Kylie Douglas described how they were required to give their passwords to church leaders, who would regularly check their online interactions to ensure they weren't communicating with anyone outside the group or consuming content that wasn't approved by the church. This level of control extended to every aspect of life within the cult. Members were told what to wear, how to behave, and even what to think. The goal was total obedience, and anyone who resisted faced severe consequences, including public shaming, social ostracization, and in some cases, physical punishment. These tactics weren't just about maintaining order, they were about breaking down the individual, stripping away their identity until all that was left was a follower utterly loyal and utterly controlled. The testimonies of those who escaped paint a horrifying picture of life within the 7M TikTok cult, where every move was watched, every action dictated, and every thought controlled. As we continue this investigation, we'll see just how deep this control went and the devastating impact it had on those who were caught in its web. Let's take a closer look at the personal stories of those who lived through the nightmare of 7M Films and the Shekinah Church. Their experiences shed light on the emotional and psychological toll that comes with being trapped in such an environment. Melanie and Priscilla Lee were two of the earliest and most vocal survivors of the cult. Melanie's journey began when she was lured into the church with promises of spiritual growth and community. But what she found was something far more sinister. Over time, the control over her life tightened. She was cut off from her family, manipulated into giving up control of her finances, and subjected to emotional and psychological abuse. Melanie realized she needed to escape when Robert Shin began pressuring her to become his mistress, a role she knew would entrap her even further. Her escape was harrowing, but it was the first step toward reclaiming her life. Priscilla, on the other hand, was not as fortunate in the beginning. She remained under the church's control for over a decade, believing the lies that leaving would condemn her to hell. During those years, she endured a steady erosion of her sense of self, as the church's teachings and Shin's manipulations took a deep psychological toll. It wasn't until 2022, when she finally broke free, that she could begin to understand the extent of the damage done to her. Priscilla's story is a stark reminder of how powerful and damaging psychological manipulation can be, especially when wielded by those in positions of trust. But the Lee sisters weren't alone in their suffering. Kylie Douglas and Nick Rayano are two other survivors whose stories echo similar patterns of isolation, control, and emotional abuse. Kylie was initially drawn to the community for the sense of belonging it offered, but soon found herself trapped in a cycle of manipulation where every aspect of her life was dictated by the church. The pressure to conform, the constant monitoring, and the fear of retribution if she stepped out of line were overwhelming. Kylie's eventual departure from the group was a painful process, but one that ultimately saved her from further harm. Nick Rayano's experience highlights the anguish faced not just by the victims, but by their families as well. Nick's parents, Lawrence and Migdalia Rayano, were heartbroken as they watched their son slip further and further away from them. Despite their repeated attempts to reach out, Nick was often too busy, too distant, or too afraid to reconnect. The emotional toll on the Rayanos was immense as they struggled to understand why their son had turned away from them and how they could bring him back. The Wilking family faced a similar ordeal with their daughter, Miranda. As they watched Miranda become increasingly distant, their concern grew. They reached out to her, but their attempts were met with silence or brief, unemotional responses. The pain of watching a loved one disappear into the clutches of a controlling group and the helplessness of being unable to reach them is something no family should ever have to endure. These personal accounts are more than just stories. They are evidence of the widespread impact that 7M Films and the Shekinah Church had on its members. The emotional scars left by the group's manipulations run deep, affecting not only the victims but also their families and loved ones. As we continue to unravel this story, these testimonies serve as a powerful reminder of the real human cost of such manipulation and control. When we talk about cults, control often extends beyond the mind and heart, it reaches into the wallet too. And 7M Films, under the leadership of Robert Shin, is no exception. The financial exploitation within this group was systematic, leaving many of its members trapped not just emotionally but economically as well. Financial misconduct. The Shekinah Church and 7M Films reportedly coerced members into handing over significant control of their finances. Members were encouraged to make donations to the church that were anything but voluntary. These donations, often large sums of money, were presented as necessary for spiritual growth and favor. But the reality was much darker. These funds were siphoned off to enrich the leaders of the organization. But it didn't stop there. Members were also pressured into working for 7M Films and related ventures for little or no pay, with the promise that their service was a form of devotion, an investment in their spiritual journey. Their earnings, particularly those who were successful influencers, were often managed by the church, with members seeing only a fraction of what they should have received. This financial control was a powerful tool, ensuring that members were financially dependent on the group, making it even harder for them to leave. Sexual abuse allegations, perhaps even more disturbing, are the allegations of sexual misconduct against Robert Shin. Melanie Lee, who had already endured years of emotional and psychological abuse, was one of the first to speak out about the sexual exploitation that was rampant within the group. She described how Shin, under the guise of spiritual leadership, attempted to manipulate her into becoming his mistress. He used his position of power to make her feel as though she had no choice, leveraging her spiritual beliefs and the fear of damnation to control her. But Melanie's story isn't an isolated incident. Other members have come forward with similar accusations, painting a picture of a leader who used his authority to exploit vulnerable women within the group. The allegations against Shin include instances of unwanted sexual advances and coercion, with some members reporting that they were pressured into sexual acts as part of their spiritual duty. These allegations have had a devastating impact on the victims, leaving them with deep emotional scars. The power dynamics at play made it incredibly difficult for these women to come forward, and even now, many of them struggle with the trauma of what they experienced. The fact that Shin has not faced legal consequences for these actions only adds to the outrage and pain felt by those who were affected. As we uncover more about the financial and sexual exploitation within 7M Films and the Shekinah Church, it becomes clear that this was not just a case of misguided spiritual leadership. It was a system of abuse designed to exploit its members for personal gain, both financially and sexually. The true cost of this exploitation is immeasurable, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and shattered trust. The rise of social media platforms like TikTok has created a new landscape for fame, a landscape where anyone with a smartphone and a bit of creativity can become an overnight sensation. But with this newfound accessibility comes a darker side, one that was expertly exploited by 7M Films. TikTok's involvement. TikTok, with its algorithm that can propel videos to millions of views in a matter of hours, became a magnet for young influencers looking to make their mark. 7M Films recognized this potential and used it to their advantage. By positioning themselves as a management company, they were able to attract ambitious young creators who were eager to turn their online popularity into a career. But behind the scenes, 7M Films and the Shekinah Church were using TikTok as a recruitment tool, drawing these influencers into their web under the guise of offering them professional support. The platform's very nature, its emphasis on viral content, follower counts, and constant engagement made it easy for 7M Films to manipulate these influencers. The more they posted, the more they were drawn into the culture of the group, isolating themselves from outside influences and becoming more dependent on the community within 7M. TikTok and social media at large provided the perfect environment for this kind of manipulation, where success is often measured by numbers rather than by personal well-being. But TikTok wasn't just a tool for recruitment, it was a tool for control. As influencers gained followers and their content started to reach wider audiences, 7M Films tightened its grip, dictating what kind of content they could create and how they should present themselves online. The influencers' online personas became another means of control, with their real lives increasingly dictated by the needs of the group rather than their personal desires or values. The allure of fame, the promise of fame and success was a powerful lure. For many of these young influencers, the opportunity to make a living from doing what they loved, creating content, was a dream come true. 7M Films capitalized on this dream, offering these influencers the chance to not only grow their platforms, but to become stars in their own right. But this promise came with strings attached. The allure of fame was used as bait, drawing these influencers deeper into the cult. The more successful they became, the more they were expected to give back to the group, whether through financial contributions, recruitment of new members, or adherence to the church's teachings. Fame, in this case, became a trap, a way to keep members invested in the group, even as the reality of their situation became increasingly apparent. The dangers of this kind of manipulation are clear. In a world where social media success is often seen as the ultimate achievement, it's easy to overlook the warning signs, to dismiss concerns in the pursuit of likes, followers, and viral fame. But as the stories of those who escaped 7M Films show, the cost of this kind of success can be incredibly high. As we've seen throughout this investigation, 7M Films and the Shekinah Church used the promise of fame to ensnare young influencers, exploiting their dreams and ambitions for their own gain. The role of social media in this story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that the quest for online fame can sometimes lead to places far darker than we ever imagined. Current legal status. Despite the serious and numerous allegations against Robert Shin and 7M Films, no criminal charges have been filed as of now. This lack of legal action can be attributed to several factors. First, the nature of the allegations, ranging from emotional manipulation to financial exploitation and sexual misconduct, often falls into legal gray areas, making prosecution challenging. Cults like the Shekinah Church operate in ways that skirt the edges of the law, using religious freedom as a shield against legal scrutiny. Additionally, the victims, many of whom have been deeply traumatized, may be hesitant to come forward publicly or may struggle to provide the kind of evidence that stands up in court. Another significant challenge is the burden of proof in cases involving psychological and emotional abuse. Unlike physical abuse, which leaves visible marks, emotional and psychological manipulation can be difficult to quantify and prove in a legal context. This has allowed Shin and others like him to continue operating with relative impunity, despite the growing number of victims who have spoken out. The implications of this case extend far beyond the individuals involved. It raises broader questions about how society views and handles cults, particularly in the digital age. The rise of social media has made it easier than ever for such groups to recruit and manipulate vulnerable individuals. The case of 7M Films and the Shekinah Church serves as a stark reminder that online platforms, while offering incredible opportunities for connection and fame, can also be dangerous tools in the hands of those with malicious intent. This case also highlights the need for greater protection of vulnerable individuals, especially young people who are drawn to the allure of online fame. As society becomes more connected digitally, there is an urgent need for better education and awareness about the risks of online communities and the potential for exploitation. The story of 7M Films is a wake up call for all of us. It challenges us to think critically about the communities we engage with online and the people we allow to influence us. It also underscores the importance of supporting victims of such exploitation and pushing for legal reforms that can better protect individuals from this kind of abuse. Over the course of this investigation, we've uncovered the deeply troubling reality behind 7M Films and the Shekinah Church. From the manipulation and control of young influencers to the financial exploitation and sexual abuse carried out under the guise of spiritual guidance, the evidence points to a systematic pattern of abuse and exploitation. The role of social media, particularly TikTok, in facilitating this exploitation cannot be overlooked, nor can the devastating impact on the lives of those who were drawn into this group. It's crucial that we remain vigilant about the online communities we engage with. As the line between digital and real life continues to blur, the potential for manipulation and exploitation grows. If you or someone you know is involved in a group that seems to demand more than it gives, that isolates you from loved ones, or that exerts control over your life in unhealthy ways, don't ignore the red flags. Speak out, seek help, and support those who are trying to break free. For those watching who feel compelled to act, consider supporting organizations that work to expose and dismantle cults or that provide support for victims of such groups. Your awareness and support can make a difference. This is just one story in a sea of many. The world of cults, manipulation, and online exploitation is vast and complex, and there's so much more to uncover. Subscribe and stay tuned for our next deep dive, where we'll continue to explore the dark corners of the internet and the real world consequences that come with it. Together, we can shine a light on these hidden dangers and protect those who might be at risk.